I'm going to talk for roughly an hour. I can sort of speed up and slow down. And this is, you will know more about swifts at the end of my talk than anyone you might know probably in the whole county. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm treating you as an intelligent, curious audience interested in the natural history of the swift, I would say. So I'm going to share my screen in a sec. And I think we're going to be aiming to do sort of 15 minutes of questions. Hopefully everything will be covered. So just before I start, essentially we're going to look at the bird and its nesting habits and behaviours, and then we're going to look at the state it's in terms of a crisis, and how you can help. And there is I don't know whether Joanna Kerr is on, I don't think so, but there is a nascent swift group in Henley. So the other thing I'll mention is, because you'll see it on the slides, is that the swift group I set up, the Maidenhead, Cookham and Marlow swift group, covers a sort of corridor between the two. So we knew there were swifts in Maidenhead, we knew there were a few swifts left in Marlow, and Cookham between us had sort of lost his swifts, but they've started to come back, and we've gradually had successes. And I personally have got 15 swift boxes on my house. I am the swift equivalent of the mad Catwoman, basically. And last year we think we had 13 chicks just fledged from our house alone. So you can make a huge difference once you get them. Okay, so I'm going to share now. There we go. So I'm just going to move the little pictures of us all over there so I can see. So this first slide really sums up why I put a lot of my time into swifts, and why I hope that a lot of you will follow suit and bring the Henley Swift Group into real being and work, because swifts are having a really difficult time, and I'll go on and explain why, but they are the most beautiful bird. So I'm just doing a move down on my slide, and it's being resistant. Oh, there we go. So this is an RSPB picture, but look at that absolute beauty, those scythe-like wings. They have been called the devil bird, but I really dislike that, because there is an extraordinarily wonderful close-up of young, because they're a white. So how old is a swift? Are swifts as a species?
Oh dear. Uh-oh. We've lost you, Jan.
Are you on mute still?
Did you? That's really interesting. I didn't
We lost you.
do anything, so somehow it dropped. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. So at what point did I go? Was this slide up?
No, it was when the last slide was up with the young swift, and we lost, the sound was booming, and we lost that as well, yeah.
Oh, okay. So can you hear me, and can you see this swift, ancient swift?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So Scania cypselus, I don't know how you pronounce that. A Latin speaker would probably know. So this is the remains of the oldest swift. So, and in a minute I'll tell you how old this is. But if you look at this fossil, the shape of the wings and the shape of the tail slightly less forked, but that is recognisably a swift to me. And you'll see that that is Eocene period, and Apus apus comes from the Miocene. So we're talking about that fossil going back about 55 million years, and the current Apus apus, which is the swift, going back about, well, between 5 and 25 million. So it is a very ancient bird. And this is one of its closest relatives, the hummingbird. So people don't realize that this is a sort of family species, but so that is a really interesting thing for me. And what's the difference between a swift, a swallow, and a house martin? Because a lot of people aren't clear, and we often get reports of swifts which are actually swallows. So swifts very rarely go below roof level. I have seen them at street level, but generally speaking, they are always high-ish in the sky, whereas a swallow will swoop low, very low, at sort of grass level, often singly, and are very white compared with the swift, which is, other than sometimes a bit of white on its chin, is a very dark brown. That's a house martin. So there's the house martin is, I think, more similar, but again, it's got white on it and it's smaller. So, you know, you can see they are different. So the main thing to think about is obviously listen for screaming, but the body shape is, or body color is very brown. One of the extraordinary things about swifts is they don't land or perch, and again, people aren't really aware of that. But if you look at the underside of a swift, see those feet, those tiny little feet, they are not designed to perch. And that is what they look like close up. Very sharp gloves, amazing weapons, really, which they obviously never use to capture anything. And that is the type of foot you're seeing there is called a pamprodactyl foot. So that's a, okay, I've got an unstable internet connection, so we'll just hopefully, can you hear me okay?
Yes, at the moment, yep.
Okay, good, all right. So yes, wear gloves if you ever handle a swift, and you may come across them. We get reports of swifts being on the ground. So if you ever pick them up, don't do it without gloves on. What about how long they live? Well, swifts have been known to live 20 years or so. 12 is more normal, but they are quite long-lived birds. So if you can give a swift a home and they are nest site faithful, then you could have them coming back that many years. So that's one of the things you need to think about. If you're going to make provision and you use an external box, which is made of wood, the likelihood is you will need to renew that box during the lifetime of the swift while it's not nesting. This one is a really interesting phenomenon. One of the things that happens with swifts is if you go outside on so they're here between, they arrive in, it's changing actually, but they arrive in early April, early May, and then they leave in about late July, August. And if you look up in the evenings and see swifts going around in screaming parties, the dusk will arrive and then there'll be a moment at which they're gone. So people have tended to assume that they've flown elsewhere, but actually what's happening is that they go up at dusk to what's called unihemispheric sleep. So they rise up to 10 or 15,000 feet and go to sleep with one half of their brain. They switch the other half of their brain, and then at dawn they descend down and then sort of go up and down, up and down. So where they go at night was a mystery until a chap in I think it was Second World War plane was up very high and saw these blips on the radar and realized it was swifts, looked out of his window and saw swifts and realized that they were flying high. So this explains what happens to them. So that's and it's my graph, by the way. It's just my sort of artistic impression of what happens, but it's a really fascinating behavior, I think. So let's look now at their nesting habits and the eggs. So these are 4 pictures of swift nests. Starting top left, beautifully neat and tidy, really, with a few bits hanging off. Every single thing they use to make a nest is in the air, airborne. So everything you're seeing there has been collected in flight, as they never land, apart from when they're breeding. But when they obviously land to make their nests, but they don't go down to the ground and pick up nesting materials. And then top right, you're seeing something I find quite distressing. So this is a nesting site that's been disturbed. Someone's taken off a roof and found a swift nest in that spot. And bottom left is a very messy version, which sometimes happens. And then bottom right is a beautiful nest with a cup-in for scale, which is at the house of someone who is a swift enthusiast in Bristol. And he uses that for sort of demonstration purposes. So they make these lovely nests, and they leave these nests in their nest boxes or in their holes until the following year, and they will have deteriorated to some degree, but because they're nest site faithful, they come back, they repair, and they glue them together with saliva. So, and in fact, in China, bird's nest soup is, if I'm right, I think is made from the glue of the saliva of chimney swifts, or a breed of swift. Anyway, but it's a glue that holds the nest together. So this is preparation for laying eggs, let's say. So swifts will mate in flight. So this is swifts mating in flight. How on earth this chap got this picture, I have no idea, but it's absolutely wonderful. And I have presented this and said mummy and daddy having a cuddle. And then this is a typical clutch. Lay 2 to 3 eggs typically in a season. They only usually lay 1 lot in a season, but they can lay a second clutch if the first clutch fails. But generally they don't lay 2, they don't have 2 broods. They just will have 2 clutches if the first clutch fails. And this is the approximate size, so about just under 2.5 centimeters long. And obviously very elongated in shape, so they will roll and not, a bit like gulls' eggs, I think. They will roll and not go. Sorry, I moved my wire. Fall off if they're on a shelf or something. But I want to draw your attention to these little brown things that are in the lower left-hand side. This is one of the. It's not symbiotic, but it's very, very common that swifts have a little creature that lives with them, and it is called the Creterina pallida louse. And I'll show you what one is like up close. They are pretty, well, louse-like, but this is what they're like on a swift. Now, you can see how big that creature is. It is huge. And when you're looking at swifts on a camera in their nest, these little things run around all over the swifts' backs. The swifts don't react to them. And I did read a paper a few years ago on how they're transmitted, whether it's adult to adult or whether they're dormant in nest boxes. But the swifts aren't there. The health of the chicks isn't affected by these lice. It's a very strange thing, but we've had them in ours, and it doesn't seem to affect the number of chicks that get through to fledging. So here are some incredibly ugly baby swifts, 2 of them. Look at those eyes. I mean, baby birds are always extraordinary, but those are the little things. And then that's them 11 days after hatching. These remind me rather of the sort of Christmas turkeys I'm vegetarian now, but Christmas turkeys we used to get with those little bits of feathers left. But those are the feathers starting to come through. And then these are about a day before they fledge. So you can see the white edges to their the fronts of their wings, their heads, to the tail feathers. And I don't know how long they keep those actually, but you know, that shows you. And one of the things you can see is just how much they're very long birds, and a lot of the nest boxes are quite tiny. And sometimes there are 3 chicks and 2 adults, and they are really packed in, but they always seem to manage. So that is mating nest making, mating, laying, and chicks. And I can't remember if I mentioned torpor later. So what I will mention is that because swifts feed on insects, and I'll come on to that in a minute, they will travel long distances sometimes if the weather's bad. So the chicks and the eggs actually are capable of entering a state of torpor, T-O-R-P-O-R, and that means they can go for 2 to 3 days with nothing, no water, no, well, they get their water from their food, but no nourishment whatsoever, and they're fine. So sometimes if there are instances of swift colonies being accidentally enclosed, so chicks are sometimes enclosed in nests because builders don't know that they're there and the adults come back. As long as you can unblock the nests within a couple of days, the chicks would still be fine. So that does give us an unusual bit of flexibility. So feeding, I think this is so great. So this is a tiny chick, a few days old, being fed a bolus, a ball of insects, by one of its parents. Both the parents feed, and it is a huge thing. And when they swallow it, their necks sort of become huge with this bolus traveling down. And there is an amazing picture taken in Israel, I think, of a swift heading for an insect in the air. Again, you know, how do they get this shot? And the one thing swifts don't do is catch insects that sting. They can tell a bee and a wasp in flight, so they don't, and any other, a hornet, I guess. So they won't catch a stinging insect. They only catch non-stinging. And if you're in front of me, I'll do a quiz question for the audience. So I'll pose the question rhetorically and then answer it myself. But what insect comprises the largest proportion of a swift's catch? And the answer is spiders. So that surprises most people. But if you think about spiders on their silks, they go, you know, high into the air, they're swept up into the air, and they are about 60% of the diet. But if swifts are above a field of rapeseed, they will be catching that little black rapeseed bug. So it does depend on where the habitats are, but spiders are really important to swifts. So this is another wonderful picture of a swift going back to its nest with a full pouch ready to feed its young. And this is a rather random one, but this is strange events that have allegedly killed swifts. Flying into a wall, that I can believe, because they fly so fast. They are the fastest bird horizontally. They fly 69 kilometers an hour. Flying into the sea, that's true. An Arctic skua pursuing a swift, which will be migrating. A fatal collision between two swifts, that I believe. Killed by a tennis ball, not really convinced by that one. Killed by a falling tree, possibly in the Congo. But that's a rather sort of set of not fun facts because it's about death, but interesting facts about swift death. But essentially, they normally would die from for two reasons. One is age, and the other is perishing on their long migration. So let's have a look at some behaviours. So this is swifts banging at my mother's house. Can you hear the sound? Can someone nod if you can hear the sound? No? Okay, I know why that is. We didn't switch it on. Shall we stop screen sharing for a moment and then, hang on a sec. I'm going to stop sharing, switch the sound on and re-share. Hang on a mo. Share computer sound, right. Right, let's try it again. There we go. Right, so the first thing can you hear me still?
Yes.
Yes, great. So the first thing you'll observe is they're going nowhere near the blooming nest box. But this is a really interesting, so this is the house that I grew up in from the age of 7. So I remember swifts flying over our house. And my mum is now in her 90s, but she was in her 80s at the time. And she said, she's a bit deaf, and she said, I don't think we're getting any swifts. And I looked out the top window, which was my bedroom at the back on the left, and said, I can see them over the local fields. And so I brought a sound system with me, which I'll talk about later, played swift calls, and they came within 90 seconds to do that. So they came to her house and showed that behavior within 90 seconds. So I said, right, we've got to get a swift box up. And they nested within 3 weeks, I think, of that going up. It was June, and so it really does show. But that's a behavior called banging. So if you have swifts doing that at your house or somewhere near you, you know they're trying to find a nesting site. So that's them saying, please provide for me. I'm desperate to find somewhere to breed. And when they do that, if there are resident birds, that's a box with 2 nest places. They will scream at the bangers saying, go away, this is occupied. And so, yeah, so it's an absolutely classic behavior. And swifts arrive in waves, and the banging intensifies through late June, July. And it's amazing to see. So they don't land, but they do cling. So what bangers will do is they will cling on, providing it's got a rough surface, and they're listening. So they think there's a nest space here. Can I hear an occupant? And then if they can't hear, they'll circle back again and look inside a nest, which is really good. If you see this, then you know that you're winning. So here's a fight. So you can see there's an egg. So yeah, their feet are their weapons, and they sometimes kill each other, and sometimes they fight not realizing it's their mate, because it takes them a moment to sort of identify their mate, and occasionally they will fight their mate before they realize. So but fights are quite distressing if you're watching it on a video, because you can get one of the parents can be killed sometimes. But this will often only happen by mistake, or where there is insufficient nesting provision. So if you only put one swift box up, which we advise people never do, then you can get fights breaking out. So that's something to be aware of. Here's the drinking behavior. So can you see this swift, another amazing photograph. Can you see this swift has its mouth ajar, or whatever the word is, and is just dipping down? But of course, if they misjudge it, they would never rise again from the water. So here's a different view of a similar thing. So you can see that swift going along the surface and scooping up water, which is another absolutely remarkable picture. Oh, torpor, I did talk about this, so I don't need to do that. This one is essentially practice flying. So if they've got enough room, they put their wings out and they just sort of press up like this to strengthen their muscles, or they'll go up the side and do it. But when they fledge, that's it, they don't return, they just literally launch themselves. So the muscles in their wings have to be strong enough to sustain flight. They don't necessarily migrate straight away, but they will fly around. No one knows for how long actually, but they fly around for a while, and they do these press ups, which is fantastic to see on camera, because you know so when you see them doing this, you know they're about to leave. And it can be because of the torpor characteristic, you can't necessarily predict how long the period is to fledging. So it might be a typical period of 42 days, but it could be 45 or 39 or whatever, because of the feeding the feeding delays that sometimes happen. So talking of which, if you have swifts in Henley and the weather's bad, they could have flown to France that day and back again. It's absolutely amazing. That is how far they will go to feed while they are in the UK. And we always have this debate in the swift community, which is, are they our swifts or not? And you can't tell, because the estimate is that 25% of chicks return to the area in which they were born, but 75% could go anywhere in Europe or in England or in Wales or in Scotland. So they are, they're just such amazing flyers. But that I think is outstanding. So British swift to itself. So the chicks fledge at different times, obviously, because the eggs aren't, well, obviously the eggs are not laid all in one day. They're normally laid a couple of days apart. But what's quite common is that the parents leave the chicks behind. So there's a time in July, sort of, I think, yeah, July, when the swift people with video cameras in their nests get frantic because the parents have gone. And sometimes they're not quite sure whether that's because the swifts have had an accident or died or something that's happened, or whether they've just gone. And they leave these swifts, these chicks, and I've seen it happen. So I've seen both parents gone, and there's one or two chicks left, and then one goes and there's one left, and it's kind of rather lonely in its nest doing its press ups. And it's often because they're too fat. So there are some swift people who have regularly weighed swifts, so it's quite disruptive, but they do know that they are heavier than they should be. So they shed a bit of weight before they can set off. Okay, migration. Yes, so swift is a bird that migrates, and this is where they spend their winters. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. That's lush, tropical jungle. And I've got this, I can't remember if it's the next one or the one after, but I've got this amazing, what would you call it? It's not a schematic, but it's a map of the world, and you will see some dots on it, and it's swifts that have got trackers on them, and it's showing them moving through the world. So this is you're going to be seeing what this is showing you, but it also shows you some Chinese swifts from Beijing. So this is a typical migration. So there are two migration routes from, so we've got one going south, which is the one that tracks the sort of central route through, but can you see they both cross at Gibraltar? Isn't that wonderful? They find their way to Gibraltar, and then they track, and the downwards one, they're tracking the coast, and then they cross inland, but they're following the shape of the continent, really. And on the way back, this particular swift, so it left on the 14th of April. Yeah, so 14th of April. So it was obviously on its way. And it went across that big area of sea, which is really risky because there's not much food. And they took 3 days to do that. Yeah, from the 14th to the 17th to do that crossing. So 3 days without food, essentially. And that's where someone will perish. And then on the way back, they're flying, I think that's the Sahara. So it's quite challenging, particularly on the way back. But you'll see the yellow. So that's what's happening in the winter. They're moving across huge areas in northern South Africa, so it's sub-Saharan Africa, but extraordinary range. So watch this go through, and what I want to say is the dots will disappear for a minute, and that's something to do with the solstices. It's a technical thing, but you'll see the swifts, and there are some coming from Beijing and some coming from the UK, and then they end up together in Africa. And watch what happens to the dots, and we'll talk about it after I've shown it. Right, here we go. They're the Beijing swift setting off. Oh, now the British ones. Off they go. That's the solstice.
Just stay apart. Yeah.
Solstice. Okay, so, oh, they're off again. So I'll talk. Can you hear me if I'm talking? I think you can over this. So the things I would, obviously there are a lot more tracked from Beijing. We lost one on the way home. I don't know if you noticed that. But what's so interesting is how they cluster in their same groups. So particularly now they're quite mixed up, but towards the end of this sequence, and I won't go through it all again, but they keep in their cluster of their type, and the Beijing type is slightly different from the European type. So it's a pity that more British ones weren't geotagged, but that's never been done. This was only done a couple of years ago, so it's an amazing. There we are. Look at how clustered they are. It's extraordinary, and our swifts obviously really like it in. Yeah, not sure. Anyway, they like it on the east coast, and the others like it down south. So isn't that wonderful? Okay. So let's talk a bit about the state they're in, keeping an eye on the time. So the decline in swifts, this is an estimate, it's very, very difficult, but this is an estimate done by a very large number of people who are in the swift community, from 87,000 pairs down to about 59,000 within 7 years, so 32% decline, which is awful, absolutely awful. And the numbers are still good per se, and bear in mind that's pairs, so you can double the numbers to get the total populations. And there's a dispute over numbers, but there's no question that they are declining, except when there are swift groups with swift boxes up, and those numbers would be rising in those localities. So this is an absolutely tragic picture. This was not in this country, I think it's Belgium, where a building was demolished in the middle of swift nesting season, and that was those were the casualties, the minimum casualties, and that's what I stopped when I ran around to the house which is now Swift House on the A308 in just north of Maidenhead. That would have been the consequence, and I'd seen this picture and I knew that's what might happen. And I'll just mention what happened. So I threw on clothes at 7:30, ran round to the site, which I could see from my house, and said, when are you demolishing this? There was a JCB in waiting to knock it down. And he said, 2 days time. And I said, you can't, there are swifts nesting. He said, no, there aren't. I said, yep, you can see them going in and out their nest. No, there aren't. I said, look round, they're there. And he said, no, we had an ecologist come and check the site. When did the ecologist come? November. Okay. I mean, it was awful, really awful. I was shocked. And that was when I learned that ecologists don't always know their species. So it's demolition, roof refurbishment, new soffits, roof replacement, guttering replacement. And I would say in most cases, people have got no idea that they are depriving a swift of its lifelong nest site, because they go into the tiniest little holes. And much to my embarrassment, Brian Clues, and if you don't know him, he's kind of the Birdman of Berkshire. He came round for drinks at our house to watch our swift boxes and the swifts coming and going. And he looked up and said, did you know you've already got a swift nest in the junction between your house and your neighbours? Had no idea. We'd lived here for 15 years at that point. So they are very, very difficult to spot. And Edward Mayer is one of the champions of the swift world, and he and others have estimated that we're losing 11,000 nest sites a year. So it is really serious losses. So nesting provision. So once upon a time, swifts nested in trees and cliffs. So this is a swift nest in Poland. And the only place they live, they don't nest anywhere in trees in the United Kingdom. They do nest in cliffs in Northern Ireland, I think there's only one site, but they do nest in cliffs. But generally speaking, they rely on buildings. So it's a really good example of an adaptation of behavior, which is now not serving them very well. So there is a hierarchy of provision for swift nests. First, it's keep what you have. Second, it's put an internal box in, which is the second picture down. Or third, it's put an external box on. And consider the length of the, if it's external, consider the length because of the life thing. So that's the hierarchy of provision. So if you know there are swifts nesting, it's about protecting those sites, because you could still, the swift could still have 13, 14 years of nesting. I don't think I mentioned that swifts don't breed for the first 2 years of their life. So they fledge, they never return to their nest, they fly around, and then a quarter of them come back roughly to where they were fledged, and the rest go somewhere else. And that's the first time they land when they're going to breed. And sometimes swifts will look into a nest box just to kind of check it out, and then they come back the following year. So sometimes people wonder why swifts come in for a while and then they don't lay or nest, and they're the people kind of just trying out the nest site for the following year. So that's great, because they'll almost certainly turn up. And if a swift loses its mate, it will often find another one during the season, because there are waves of non-breeding swifts arriving, or first-year breeding swifts arriving. So somehow they tell each other that, you know, they're looking for someone. So one of the things to mention is this idea of helping swifts. So this is called a nest concave. And they sell these for budgerigars, but those are a little bit small. These have been made specially for swifts, but there is a really easy way of DIYing these, which I've done, which is to get two squares of ply, and you cut out a circle from one, glue them together, and then you use external polyfiller, and you shape a nice sort of concave, and that works really well. And we feather their nests for them when we make boxes. Bob makes boxes, because they've been flying for 3 weeks or whatever it is to get back from Africa, and then they got to blinking fly around and pick up feathers and so on. So if you save them that, they can conserve their energy and possibly lay sooner. So so some of us do that for them, and some of the boxes that I'll be showing you have these already built into the sort of structure of the shape. But nest concaves stop eggs from rolling out, which they do roll out. They retain existing. Look at this. It wasn't put in especially for you, because I've used this presentation before, but Chantry House is one of the, in the swift world, one of the famous case studies of provision, because while the house was being refurbished, temporary boxes were provided. And the good news was, I'm not sure how many of those were used, because this was before my time, but the good news was that once these scaffolding and plastic was taken away, the swifts came back. So they might have missed a year of breeding, but they still return, which is really wonderful. So next is internal or built-in. So we're now looking at this second vision, which is, and this is a really simple homemade box that someone has done, where the entrance is that little square on the bottom left, and then they're fitted into a nest, into a roof space like that. And there's obviously an inspection box on the top. So that's one way of providing internally. This is a little video of another way. So you're taking out a brick, putting in a little entrance brick, and then you're fitting a box behind it. It's very simple. And you can buy they're called, I can't remember what they're called, these little, you can buy those little infills. Okay, and this is the work that we did. We've got 2 internal boxes on our house. We have a Victorian house, and we realized that there was a ceiling that could be used as a floor for 2 swift boxes. These weigh a ton. They will never ever deteriorate in the life. This will do generations of swifts essentially. So This shows the entrances and the boxes themselves, and the big grey box was put flush against the front face, and then this was slotted in, and it works really well. And that's the installation in progress. So you can see the if you can see my pointer, you can see here that the left and right, the white entrances are at brick level, and then the grey ones fit behind it. And what you don't want is any space, because the swifts could fall down, so you have to fill in with mortar or some other filler between the two, or use an actual tunnel, because you can use piping that they'll go through. So swifts will actually go down quite a long pipe, I would say maybe 1.5 feet long. They will crawl down a pipe, so they're very good at finding internal spaces. So this is the top of a gable, and that was the finished result. Incredibly neat. You can't really see it at all. They love it. They were in so fast. They always prefer internal boxes because they're safer for them. They also don't get so hot. It's just a really safe, secure, dark environment. They like it to be really dark. So yeah, that's really neat. So that was the one we used on the left. That's another one on the right. So you could use the one on the right, you would put into a wall and have it, you know, up against the, instead of bricks, essentially. So here are a few more internal ones. So up left is the one I've just shown you at the right hand side, which is instead of the bricks, it's replaced that. Lower left, this is in the Duchy of Cornwall's Nansledden estate, where all the houses have got swift provision, and they're circular entrances, which is unusual. And then on the right, you see a slightly different version, which is a brick shape. And then top right, you see 6 of internal boxes rather neatly done on an end gable. And one of the things to mention is that some of the commercial provision, it's more than 28 millimeters deep, maybe 30. And and ours are all 26, 27 millimeters deep. And that is to stop starlings using them. If they're 30, starlings will use them, but the commercial providers haven't entirely got onto this yet, or they haven't changed their machinery. So we're still getting, there's a risk of starlings using the swift boxes, and it's quite tough for the starlings to get the swifts to get them out. So what people do, sometimes they block them up each year with a sock, and they pull them out when the swifts are coming. But generally speaking, you're looking for something that's smaller than 28 mil high. So this is really interesting, though. This is a building, and there are 11 swift boxes in this building, which are there. So if you look on the left, you can barely see them, but these are a really good provision for swifts. That's about as low as you could go. In Marlow, if any of you know the Back in Action shop by Platt's, the garage at the end of town, as if you were going out to Henley, there is a swift nest which is at the height of just above the front door in this bungalow. It's one of the lowest swift sites in the country, and they find these swifts on the ground because the babies, when they fledge, can't make the turn. They're not experienced enough. But that's quite low, but it is high enough. So what you're looking for when you're putting an internal or an external box up is ideally 5 meters, because when the swift comes out, they naturally drop and then rise again. So if I'm standing in the garden, they drop out of our boxes, they skim my head sometimes. I'm 5'4", so they do come quite low when they're leaving their nests. That's a picture of a swift, beautiful picture of a swift leaving its internal box with its wings up. So this is, oops, hang on. This is really good example of where you have, in a newer house, you'll have an external bricks, you'll have an insulation layer, and then you can put a box behind that with a pipe. So that's again showing ways of combining all these things. And these things are all, and that's a homemade box, but you can combine commercial with homemade, which this shows you. So external provision, there's DIY or you can buy. So DIY, and I'll come on to Bob. Oh, this is DIY in Bristol. Loads of boxes. went in on the left. There's an intruder. Okay, so that was banging behaviour. I don't know if you saw, but on the left there was a swift that entered, and then another swift poked its head in and was being screamed at. So this is Mark and Jane's house in Bristol. They were the ones with the nest and the mug. They have nest boxes all the way around and at the back. Something very interesting about this this nesting site. On the left, can you see? Actually, it's around the back. But he put a box up, and the swifts weren't using it. And then he realised that they had been using an entrance where there was a black vertical pipe. So he painted, or he stuck on a black vertical pipe to the left of the hole in the nest box, and the swifts went straight in. So they were obviously imprinted with this idea of there being a round black shape to the left of their hole. It was just remarkable. This guy does loads of experiments of dark inside, white inside, vertical boxes and so on. So he's amazing. And this is design that he used that we now use. So if any of you have boxes made by Bob, and I'll come on to that in a minute, I'm keeping an eye on the time, this is the design that he essentially uses. So you'll see it's a twin box. It's got this double set cavity I mentioned, and then the black is a landing strip, so they will cling onto the black and crawl in and then make their nest. And you'll see that the nest concave is away from the entrance, so they're less likely to fall out. They do fall out, little chicks do fall out sometimes. And this one is for fitting, so this one's got a flat top, so that's for fitting under a soffit, because what you don't want are predators landing on the top, because they can take baby swifts and take swifts as they come and go. So you see that's for fixing upwards. And that is Bob fitting. So those boxes I've got sloping roofs, and that's for a free on a wall sort of thing. And that's Bob fitting the boxes at Braywick Nature Centre. And so these are some of the DIY settings that Bob has done. And you'll see on the top right, it's a gable end, which is very beautifully done because it blends largely with the surroundings, but it has white to reduce the temperature. And then on the bottom left is a triple, and again bottom right another setting. So our group's provision, it's a combination of external nesting places, mostly a swift house, which is the replacement for the building that was demolished. They had to wait 3 months, by the way, before they demolished it, and then they demolished it, and they put 28 boxes in internally, and we saw them using them for the first time last year. So it's taken it took 4 seasons for the swifts to find them, even though they were in almost identical spots, because when they're disconcerted, that's not great. Premier Inn have got them. We don't know if they're using them because they need monitoring a lot, and I haven't had time to do that, but they've got them in there. We've got a Swift Tower and Cookham Methodist Church and St Luke's. Churches are wonderful for Swifts, but each one is a custom. So 301 in almost all of those in a year. So that was a really good number. Commercial boxes, I have these on my house. They are very long lasting. They're made of something called woodcrete, which is concrete and wood mix. The one on the left is to go under a flat roof, and the one on the right is to stand out. And we paint ours to match the house with an eco-friendly paint. These are really popular, even though they're external. They're very, very popular. And there are some other designs. So there are all sorts of designs online that you can get. Cherry pickers are really handy because they love being high. So this is the kind of height swifts love. But you're obviously going to have to get a cherry picker if any of them need replacing. And the one important thing to say is that swift nest boxes do not need cleaning out. You never have to clean them out. So that's all you need to know, really. Swift Tower, this was, I think, more of a PR exercise. Sparrows have nested in here, but no swifts yet. But we are ever hopeful. It is by the sewage treatment plant, which is semi-open. There are lots of insects, and swifts have been seen near, but we don't know if they're nesting, and it's nowhere near anyone, so we have no one monitoring it. And I'm so busy, I never get time to go and look. But anyway, it's solar powered with a sound system. Swift attraction calls. I said that I played calls at my mum's house, and this is what I did. Really, really simple. It's a little amplifier in the middle with a either an SD card or a micro SD these days, or a USB port. So this is slightly moved on actually, this little amplifier. And what you're doing is playing the calls of Swift. It's a mixed number of calls that say, hello, I'm here, I'm occupying a nest. So you're mimicking Swift occupation by playing these calls. And you have a long cable, and you put the little car tweeter, which is £2, and you put it as close to the box as possible. And when Bob does it, he installs them right underneath the box, but they're not waterproof, so they often fail. We get quite a high failure rate, about 20%. They're cheap, but they're a bit of a bore to change. And you obviously can do this more substantially if you've got a bigger speaker. I'll just talk about when you play them. So if you have Swift calls, which we strongly recommend, it might take several years to get Swifts to come, but I got ours in 3 weeks flat because there were Swifts nearby. If you can play them all day loudly, that's wonderful, but you'll drive your neighbors bonkers if you have nearby neighbors. So what we recommend is that you try to play them for an hour or two in the morning and an hour or two in the evening. Just watch the Swifts, and they're usually busy between about 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning, and sort of early evening up till about 8:30, 9, depending on when dusk is. And these are, like you heard, they're not the screaming calls, but they're like the sort of nest calls. So, and they're wonderful. But be really respectful of neighbours, because people can be driven mad by. So if, for example, you're hard of hearing, you need to get someone else to come and check the volumes, because you can't tell, and it can be quite irritating. So just be respectful of them. So these are now the slides. So I'm nearly finished, actually. These are the slides that were sent. So these are the options that Bob and the Bissum Nest Box group that he runs will provide. So this is, I think it's 6 guys and a woman, and there may be 5 guys and a woman. They were, but they've stopped since COVID, meeting and creating a sort of standard design on the left. And then they were doing specials for people with restricted spaces. And there are more styles, but these are the main ones. So they're really nicely done. They're generally done in white, because it used to be said that you couldn't put Swift boxes on a southern aspect because of the sunshine. But if you paint them white, and you think how hot it got, was it last summer? It was absolutely roasting. It really was hot. And the Swift chicks were fine. So if the boxes were a problem on the south facing aspect, and there are plenty of people with them on south facing, including us, you would see Swift chicks perishing, and we didn't. So we're pretty sure that if all else is equal, that the temperatures are okay. And they do live in the hottest part of Africa for a lot of the winter. So yeah, so they always provide more than one. And then they're slightly more evolved. So there's now landing strips, and you can see he's indicating where the speakers are. So he's got, on the right hand side, we've got these for our house, and we put these at Premier Inn. They're boat speakers, so they're about £10 or £12 each, but they are water resistant and last a long time and make a nice noise. And the middle one's a boat speaker, and on the left is a little speaker, the little tweeter that you saw. So there's the vertical one with 3, and there's the gable one with 3, and there's a rather nice example of what they look like inside with the feathered nest places.
Yeah.
And then this is Bob's house. He's got more boxes in one little bit of his house than I've got on mine, but he's got he calls himself the R&D department, but he essentially had Swifts in two of these places. So normally occupancy is 50%. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So he'd expect 5 pairs eventually. That would be good going, 5 pairs. So you need to almost over provide. So these are he's really good. He keeps records. I'm so busy, I don't keep records, but there's his trio of babies 1 year. And these figures will probably be too small for you to see, but essentially he keeps careful notes, years, and he's tracked them more carefully. And he's had them fledging between the 17th of July and the 25th of July. And if there was a second chick, they fledge a few days later. Oh no, same day actually, 22nd. That's interesting. And they were arriving around the well, you can see 2018 was the 7th, 2019 was the 6th, and 2020 was the 5th. So, you know, I don't know if this is climate change, but they are gradually creeping forward in their arrival times. And I think that is the last one. Well, look at that, almost bang on an hour. So I will stop my sharing, and I hope you enjoyed that. Over to you, Dave, to host the questions.
Well, thank you so much, Jan. That's absolutely fascinating. Now then, can I just get so I can see people? And then if you have got a question, if you can wave at me and unmute yourself. And I don't know if I've got everybody in front of me, of course.
Oh, Heather has got her hand up.
Right, okay, well spotted. Heather, you've got a question. Heather, have you got a question?
Yeah, she's trying to unmute herself.
Right.
You can do that for her if you know how to do that.
Yeah.
Unmute. Ask it. No, it's not. Wait a minute, let's see if I can do it another way.
No, I've got the controls, so I can't. Oh, there we are. You're unmuted, Heather.
Right. Well done.
Okay. We live in a bungalow. How low down can swift boxes reasonably be put?
The image I showed you of the bungalow. So if you have a gable, you might just about get away with it. You need a couple put in. You could try. That's quite low. You might get swift fatalities and landing on the ground, but generally speaking, bungalows are difficult because they are 5 meters is the optimum height. So you're looking for, yeah, 5 meters is ideal. You're looking for an open flight path with no obstructions like trees. They will fly around telephone wires. Interesting, they can see those. But they don't want vegetation close to the box because predators like rats could get into the box and take the chicks. But okay. Unfortunately, a bungalow is a little low.
Okay.
Suzanne?
Yes, Suzanne. Yeah. No.
I'm trying to wave to my husband to give me the to give me the battery lead. I'm sorry, I didn't have a question. Sorry.
That's good. I've never seen that happen before. Oh, Catherine is waving.
Yeah.
Hello, Catherine.
Hello, good evening. Hi, Jan. Nice to see you.
And you.
I saw you about hedgehog feeding boxes last time in Maidenhead, some years ago now. I live up actually near Heather, and I'm thinking about putting swift boxes in. And I know David Dickey's got a swift box, and he's sort of about 10 minutes walk up the road. And maybe Sally as well is going to have one. So we're going to have a swift community, I hope. I'm not sure if our councillor is here. She was earlier on. I would love to see a project of getting swift boxes in Henley. I think we've got a couple of terrific sites. Probably Gillet's school is one of them. The River and Rowing Museum is just, in my opinion, if I was a Swift, I'll go there first. A deluxe location right next to the river. Maybe the town hall as well. But I'm sure that we can do something in Henley. But we need to present it to the town council and get this going, I think, as well as Greener Henley, who do a fabulous job. We need to get it out there much more. McCarthy and Stone. I mean, they're already doing this project. We've got in Henley McCarthy and Stone. I think we should really go and ask them if they can do something there. And I know their residents are very good at wildlife. I know quite a few people there. I'm heading that way myself, I think that's the problem. Anyway, but thank you. And I would hope that we could meet up again in the future and just say how many swift boxes we have. You know, it could be a growing interest.
So it's quite interesting. I didn't particularly cover that, but I know our borough ecologist Becky Anderson really well, And the founder of Wild Maidenhead, Fiona Hewer, is now working at Henley Town Hall every day. Not every
Oh,
day, but 3
yes.
days a week.
Exactly.
So
We have no excuse now, actually, to be.
So she knows about the Swift work. So
Yeah.
so the one, there are sort of twin pathways for this. One is to go the sort of systematic provision route. So Becky Anderson has mapped what she calls Swift opportunity areas, and she knows where people have reported Swifts. There's Swift Mapper. There are other RSPB has notes of where Swifts have been seen, and she will conditioning is what in planning they mean when they ask a developer to include provision for something, and Becky puts Swift provisions in if there's a development, but that's normally completely fresh builds. That's new builds completely. That's not the case where someone's refurbishing. That doesn't involve the council. So, and then retrofitting, which is what we're talking about, which would be Gillett's or the town council building. What we did actually was we just talked to our council, RBWM, and said, who's your lighting contractor? And they gave us a name, and I just rang them up and said, would you contribute a cherry picker for the day? And we got a free use of a cherry picker. So we were able to do multiple Swift boxes on that day, very, very high up. So there's no need to pay for these things, just be resourceful and ask. And it's lovely. Can you imagine how lovely it is as a cherry picker driver not to do a bloody light, but actually to put a Swift box in? They absolutely loved it. So so there is the how are the planning team making sure that Swifts are provided in every single development that's new, housing as well as social housing, industrial, all of those sorts of housing with the right, and there's lots of information online about them. And then there is the other pathway is private provision, and that's quick because the individual house owner, if they've got the right setting, can put a box up, get a box and put it up within a week, if they've got a ladder. So we're lucky where we are that Bob will put boxes up, but he said he'll make them for Henley, but it's too far for him to come on top of what he's already doing to come and fit them. So Henley needs to find a man with a ladder, and this is an informal provision. So Bob isn't linked to our group. They have their own insurance, but he and another person go and do it in a pair. So you need to find a Bob. You need a Bob.
Yeah.
Or a set of Bobs.
I think really we would need Bob to show somebody, so they could learn the skill.
Definitely.
I mean, it's got to be in the right place. We've got to minimize any fatalities or, because it's very discouraging and it's the wrong news to give everybody when it goes wrong. So we need the expertise. We need someone an apprentice, and have our Swift box person. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I agree. And they perhaps could shadow Bob in this area and then come back to Henley, be supervised once by him, and then carry on. The other thing to mention about Bob is an absolute, as I am, an absolute fan. I am evangelical about Swift calls because they are so effective if you have passing Swifts. Now, Bob is in the middle of nowhere at Birch's Green, no Swifts nesting nearby, and he's still got Swifts because he played his calls. The tricky part about a non-private household setting is who manages the Swift calls. So, for example, if it's a school, when are they turned on and off? What happens in the holidays? The Swifts are there in the holidays. Is somebody going to go in? So you have to, because what you want to avoid is getting everyone really excited to do an organisational building, and then Swifts don't come for 10 years or never come. And that is a risk if you can't have the sound aspect taken care of.
Jan, wouldn't that just be when they arrive around late April and early May?
No,
you have to
play right through
all through until July.
Because the first birds to return are the existing breeding birds. So some non-breeders come back early, but the wave of non-breeders comes back through June and July. So they are still arriving. We notice it here. The numbers of Swifts gradually grow. And that's before they fledge. So it's not fledging Swifts. So you need to spread your bets basically, and play for as long as you can stand it.
Yeah.
And then once that, so we've stopped playing because we have 8 or so established pairs now.
That's
after 3
helpful.
years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the River and Rowing Museum would be really good.
So they would be able to play the calls, do you think?
Yeah, but the COVID's got in the way maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
Can I ask how many people here would be interested in the idea of having a Swift box on their house? 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly. 5, yeah, okay.
Some people we can't see.
And there
Yes.
are 6 people without
That's
videos.
right, yes. Yeah, so
Can I
maybe
just
more.
can I just ask a question?
Yes,
I don't actually live in Henley, so I'm an interloper, but I'm really interested in putting a box up.
Oh,
I
well,
live in
that's
Caversham. So how would I mean, I don't know whether there are Swifts around in Caversham. I don't
There
know.
are.
And which,
Yeah, there are.
oh, there
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Excellent. And which is the best way for a box to face?
Ideally north.
Ideally north, right.
Next option east. Next option west. Last option south.
Right. Thank you.
North, east, west, south. So that's getting hotter and hotter, basically. And
Thank
obviously you might get north, west or whatever.
Yeah.
And if it's south, southwest, you definitely need them to be white, and they need to have a thick roof. And you won't get those commercially. But those Wood Creek boxes I showed you, which weigh a ton, but they are, and you need at least 2. So that's about £70 for 2. And then you just need to find someone with a ladder who's willing to put them up. But those, and you can paint those any color you like, so you can make them the same color as the house, or if they're in the right place, like north. Ours are actually red, they're not white, they're a sort of brick red color, but they're fine. They're on that is west facing, and they've been fine for the chicks. But if you're south facing, it needs to be painted white.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, John.
Yeah, I do think it would be rather wonderful if things could move on and some sort of David Attenborough type person could persuade a government to say that with every build or alteration over a certain size, that provision had to be made not only for swifts but for all sorts of types of birds and wildlife, except rats, of course. But you know, that would take a lot of persuading. But if we don't start talking about it to these people, mentioning it to our MPs, it would never happen. But you know, we are at the moment in the middle, other than the coronavirus debate, debating how we're losing wildlife and such things. And you know, it is a thought that it could be persuaded.
I'm just looking up the Environment Bill because I think it's in there. So it is recognised at governmental level. Prince Charles has been very, very influential. There are 2 really good, so the places to look if you want to know more, you're interested in Swifts, are Swift Conservation website and Action for Swifts. So Swift Conservation is a classic website, and that is about, that's oriented towards policy and about the Swift, whereas Action for Swifts is about practical projects. It's a wonderful, and our project is on there, Dick Newell in Cambridge. But the work of those 2 people and many in the Swift community has meant that swifts and other animals are now being catered for much more. And some of the housing developers are fantastic, and they put boxes in every other house or whatever, and I think it's 8 different species will use a Swift box. So Swift box is used by swifts, house sparrows, starlings, wasps, bees, hornets, can't remember the other one, but anyway, loads of different things. So you kind of, instead of being disappointed if your Swift box has a sparrow in it, you have to kind of say, well, house sparrows are having a terrible time, so that's quite good.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is got much better. I can't remember exactly where we got to, but it is much better. Yeah.
But we live in Sonning Common, so presumably if you're getting swifts in Caversham, we would get them here.
Yeah, they'll fly over as long as you're playing.
We see them
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
summer.
Yeah.
Mm.
Suzanne, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I was just going to ask, is there ever any conflict between swallows and swifts? The
No.
swallows, no, okay.
No. The usual, it's a good question. The usual conflict is where sparrows will nest on top of swift nests. So a sparrow will go into a swift box and build its nest on top. So you get this stack, really high stack, you know, as high as I'm indicating, maybe 5 or 6 inches. So when the swift comes back, it can't use the nest because the sparrows have been in there. So that is an example of where you might need to actually intervene if you don't want sparrows to be in there. But the swift will turf out the sparrow if there's one in there. With a starling, it's more difficult. They can't usually prevail. And yet I have actually seen a starling head poking out of one of our swift boxes before we took them down to put the video cameras in after the first year, and we made the entrances smaller. So after the first year we didn't see any starlings in them, but we have seen a starling, but they've never come back. We've always had swifts. So we got swifts in 3 of our 6 boxes, and we got 5 cameras, so we can see 5, usually see 3 nesting pairs. But don't put video cameras in until you know you've got a nesting box, I would say, either, because they can fail, and it's best to do it later, unless it's an impossible setting. And we had to build a scaffold tower to put our swift boxes up, so it was quite an undertaking.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a one too.
Mm.
Anybody else got a question for Jan? What do people think about getting a swift nest box group together? Because there's obviously lots of opportunities to try and promote swift, find homes for swifts in Henley, even if your own house or building isn't appropriate. Would people be interested in that?
Well, I would if I lived in Henley.
Well, how far away are you?
Well, between Marlow and Henley.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I think it can be Henley and surrounds.
If you extended your group, yes.
Yes, we're expanding.
I don't think it's necessary to have a group if you're going to be like a foster family. It would just be nice to exchange each other's successes or information. So
yes,
I think Greener Henley is such a good vehicle for this sort of thing, for swifts, maybe hedgehog swifts or whatever.
Yeah.
Because you can always update the news on a newsletter or something like this. So I think it would be important perhaps to take a few names. I mean, John, myself, Sally, people who have got swift boxes or would like to have one, or would like to speak to the town hall about, or the neighbourhood plan, putting it in there. If we're all like-minded, we could form a list and then a group. But
yes, I think that's right. A step at a time, then. So yes, if you'd be interested in being kept in touch, then let's say, and I might ask you, Catherine, would you be happy to sort of facilitate that?
Yeah, sure. If you pop my email on in a newsletter or anything like that, and just email
I think if people would just like to indicate if they'd like to be then kept in touch about swift activity in Henley. So Jackie?
Suzanne?
Yes, please.
I'll take
Barry and
right, I'm slow right, I'm afraid. John Stoves, was that?
Malcolm's partner.
Yeah, John Stoves, yeah.
John Stoves, right. Okay. Did somebody say Malcolm?
Yes, Malcolm's partner had her.
Well, that's Diana, is it? Malcolm and Diana? Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a list already, doesn't it?
Good.
Oh, yes.
Encouraging.
Going rapidly.
One of the, so it's probably worth just mentioning how we manifest ourselves. So we got going by just having one article in the Maidenhead Advertiser. So if you get into the Henley Standard and say the Swift group is now, because there was one formed on Facebook a few years ago, but it's nascent. So I think that could be just revived. because Facebook is very, very good for community stuff, we found. Maybe an article local paper, and it doesn't take long, and you know, we've had loads of people asking, and the word will get round. But one of the best ways to do it, COVID notwithstanding, is to do a swift walk. So on a lovely warm evening at about 6:30, June, maybe a couple of weeks in a row in case the weather's poor, so you can kind of choose one of them, just walk around and look in the sky and see if you can see any, just plot a route. If you know you've got them. If there aren't any swifts in Henley, obviously it's not worth doing, but anyway, you know there might be swifts, then you can go and check them out. And that's, people notice and they ask what you're doing, and then it's kind of an on the ground thing.
And also we've got Fiona at the town hall.
Yes.
I mean, this is just, as I said, there's no excuse not to do something.
And the other thing to say is that there is an amazing network of over 100 Swift groups now, and it's a I'd call it a quasi-professional network. It's not got a website, but if you know me, I can tell you about it. And it's called Swift's Local Network, and it's the most extraordinary information sharing network. And if you had a group, you could join it, and then that's the way I've learned what I've learned, is by reading back in time. And it's really good to have knowledge, but it depends on people having time. But the Swift's Local Network is, if you form a group eventually, then do join that, because it's wonderful.
Okay. Right. Anyone who's missed out on a question or didn't get a chance to give their name? Otherwise, I'm going to say a really big thank you to Jan. It's been absolutely fascinating. Yes, if we're not muted, then perhaps we can give you.
Oh, thank you.
You might hear some of that. but many thanks. I don't know if you noticed, but behind Jan is a diagram of something with the word heal written at the top. Jan's also passionate about rewilding, and she has said that she will come back and see us in January and give a talk about rewilding.
Is she? Is she?
So that's
I'd like to have your email address then, if I may, Jan, because it's a project I'm leading at the moment to do a bit of rewilding.
Really easy.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Can't write it down, but anyway, Dave could share it with you. Jan at healrewilding.org.uk.
Yeah,
I can't wait to tell you all about it. It's a national charity which is raising money to buy land for rewilding. So a NEP in every county is our goal. I just decided to spend the rest of my life helping nature. So nature and the climate. And this, I'm going to say this now because I was going to do this before Christmas. This is Heal 3x3. This is the way that we're getting a land sponsored. And this is a Christmas, you can buy these as Christmas gifts. So you can buy the sponsorship of a piece of land. We don't have the land yet, but we expect to have it probably next year, but our target's 2022 at the latest. So it'll be in the south of England, somewhere between Somerset and Kent. And it will mean that you are linked to this little piece of land, and you can't see this, but it's a beautiful illustration. So anyway, I'd love to come back and talk to people about that at a date to be fixed in the new year.
Yeah, and we would love to have you. So yeah, many thanks, Jan. Thanks very much indeed.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks all for coming.
With that, yes, thank you for coming. And we'll say good night to everybody.
Bye everyone.
Good night.
See you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Night then. Yeah. Yes, this Sally, wakey. Night, Alan.